I opened my mailbox on that Tuesday morning in Phoenix, Arizona, expecting the usual stack of client invoices and business contracts, but instead found absolutely nothing, not even junk mail. That hollow metal box mocked me as I stood there in my driveway, confused and increasingly worried about the 3 times sensitive contracts I knew should have arrived by now. My name is Ryan Peterson, and I run a digital marketing consultancy from my home office in the Saguaro Heights subdivision. For the past 5 years, everything had been smooth sailing until about 6 weeks ago when Deborah Lancaster moved into the neighborhood and immediately took over as HOA president. The woman had made it her personal mission to enforce every single rule in our covenant with the enthusiasm of a drill sergeant, but this felt different. This felt targeted. I walked back inside and called my biggest client, a tech startup in Scottsdale that was supposed to overnight a contract worth $40,000. My stomach dropped when their office manager confirmed they had sent it 3 days ago via certified mail to my home address. That was the third important document that had supposedly been delivered but never reached my hands. "Are you sure you have the right address?" I asked, even though I knew they did. "Absolutely. 2847 Desert Bloom Drive. We have the tracking number showing it was delivered and signed for yesterday at 10:15 in the morning. I was home yesterday at 10:15. Nobody knocked on my door. Nobody left a delivery notice. Something was very wrong." After hanging up, I immediately pulled up the USP's tracking website and entered the numbers for all 3 missing packages. Each one showed the same status, delivered and signed for. But the signature on the electronic confirmation looked nothing like mine. It was loopy and exaggerated, almost theatrical. My signature is a quick scrawl, barely legible. This looked like someone had practiced making it fancy. I grabbed my keys and drove straight to the post office on Camelback Road. The clerk, a tired-looking man named Morris, pulled up my address in the system and frowned at his screen. "Says here there's a mail forwarding order on your address," he said, adjusting his glasses. "What? I never filed a mail forwarding order." "Well, someone did. Filed about 5 weeks ago. All business-related mail for Ryan Peterson at your address is being redirected to a P.O. box here in Phoenix." My hands clenched into fists on the counter. "What P.O. box?" Morris hesitated, then wrote down the number on a slip of paper. "Box 3847. "But sir, if you did not authorize this, you need to file a complaint immediately. This could be mail fraud, which is a federal crime." I took the paper with shaking hands. "Can you tell me who filed the forwarding order? It shows here it was submitted online with a confirmation code." But there's also a note that someone came in person 2 weeks ago to verify it. A woman named Deborah Lancaster. She claimed she was your property manager and needed to ensure business correspondence was being handled properly due to HOA violations. The rage that flooded through me was like nothing I had experienced before. Deborah Lancaster, the HOA president. She had been intercepting my business mail for over a month, which explained why 3 deals had fallen through, why clients had been calling me confused about ignored contracts, and why my business bank had sent me a warning about unpaid invoices that I had never even seen. "I want to file a formal complaint right now," I said, my voice tight with controlled anger. "And I need that forwarding order canceled immediately." Morris nodded sympathetically and pulled out the necessary forms. As I filled them out, my phone rang. It was Janet Yee, another client whose contract had mysteriously gone unanswered. I had been working with her skincare company for 2 years, and now she was threatening to sue me for breach of contract. "Janet, I need you to listen to me very carefully," I said, stepping away from the counter. I never received your contract. Someone has been stealing my mail. Ryan, that is the most ridiculous excuse I have ever heard. We sent it certified. It was signed for. By someone who is not me. I am at the post office right now filing a federal complaint for mail fraud. Can you send me a copy of that signature confirmation? There was a long pause. Fine. But Ryan, if you are lying to me about this, our business relationship is over and my lawyers will be in touch. After I finished at the post office, I drove straight to the HOA office, which was really just Deborah's house at the front of our subdivision. She had converted her garage into a makeshift community center, complete with a laminated sign that read, Saguaro Heights, HOA official business hours by appointment only. It was 11 in the morning on a Tuesday. I did not have an appointment, and I did not care. I rang the doorbell repeatedly until Deborah finally opened the door. She was exactly what you would picture when someone says, HOA president. Mid-50s, with an asymmetrical blonde bob that probably cost $300 to maintain, wearing a pantsuit despite working from home, and carrying a tablet like it was a weapon. Ryan, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. You did not make an appointment. Where is my mail, Deborah? Her expression did not change, but I saw something flicker in her eyes. Calculation. I have no idea what you are talking about. Really? Because the post office has your name on a mail forwarding order for my address, a forwarding order I never authorized. That's a federal crime, Deborah. She crossed her arms. I filed that forwarding order as part of my duties as HOA president. You are running an illegal business out of a residential property, which violates our covenant. Section 12. Paragraph 4 clearly states that no home-based business may receive commercial mail in quantities that exceed normal residential standards. I could not believe what I was hearing. So you decided to steal my mail. I did not steal anything. I redirected it to protect the integrity of our community. You have been receiving excessive business correspondence, which is not allowed. The HOA board voted to enforce this rule, and I was simply ensuring compliance. The HOA board did not vote on anything. You became president 6 weeks ago and have not even held a board meeting yet. And even if that rule exists, you cannot just steal someone's mail. That's not how any of this works. Deborah's fake smile disappeared entirely. I suggest you watch your tone, Mr. Peterson. The HOA has the authority to enforce community standards. If you have a problem with that, you can take it up with the board at our next meeting. In the meantime, I will continue to hold any business mail that arrives at the P.O. box until you either cease your illegal operations or relocate them to a proper commercial space. Give me my mail right now, or I am calling the police. Go ahead, she said, and actually smiled. I am sure they will be very interested in hearing about your zoning violations. I pulled out my phone and dialed 911 right there on her doorstep. Deborah's smile faltered slightly, but she held her ground. When the dispatcher answered, I explained the situation as calmly as I could manage. They said they would send an officer to take a report. You are making a huge mistake, Deborah said as we waited. The HOA has extensive legal resources. You cannot win this fight. We'll see about that. Officer Martinez arrived about 15 minutes later. He was a young guy, probably late 20s, and he listened patiently as I explained everything. Then he turned to Deborah. Madam, did you file a mail forwarding order for this gentleman's address without his permission? I filed it in my capacity as HOA president to enforce community rules, Deborah said primly. That's mail fraud, Officer Martinez said bluntly. HOA authority does not extend to intercepting federal mail. Where is the mail you have been holding? I am not required to answer that without speaking to my attorney. Officer Martinez sighed and pulled out his notepad. Madam, I strongly suggest you cooperate. Mail fraud is investigated by postal inspectors and can result in federal charges. If you return Mr. Peterson's mail right now and agree to cancel the forwarding order, we might be able to resolve this without federal involvement. Deborah's face had gone pale. I do not think she had actually considered that what she was doing was a serious crime. She probably thought she was just exercising her authority as HOA president, enforcing rules and maintaining standards. The reality of potential federal prosecution was clearly hitting her. Fine, she said tightly. Wait here. She disappeared into her house and returned 5 minutes later with a cardboard box. Inside were dozens of envelopes, all addressed to me. I recognized the return addresses immediately. Clients, vendors, my business insurance company, the Arizona Department of Revenue, and yes, all 3 of those critical contracts. I will need to document this, Officer Martinez said, taking photos of the box and its contents. Mr. Peterson, I recommend you contact the Postal Inspector's office to file a formal complaint. This is beyond what local police can handle. I thanked him and carried my box of stolen mail back to my truck. My hands were shaking with a mixture of relief and fury. As I drove home, I started making a mental list of everything I needed to do. Contact every client whose correspondence had been intercepted. File complaints with the postal inspector, the state attorney general, and the real estate commission. And find a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes, because this was far from over. When I got home, I spent the next 4 hours going through the intercepted mail. It was worse than I thought. Deborah had been holding on to my mail for 38 days. The contracts were all past their deadline dates. My business insurance had actually been canceled due to non-response to a renewal notice I had never seen. The Arizona Department of Revenue had sent me 2 warnings about unfiled quarterly reports, with the second warning threatening penalties and interest. I called Janet back first and explained everything, sending her photos of her contract still sealed in its original envelope with the delivery date clearly visible. She was horrified. Ryan, I am so sorry. I should have believed you. This is absolutely insane. It gets worse. I told her about the canceled insurance and the tax problems. I need to ask for extensions on everything while I sort this mess out. Of course. Take all the time you need, and Ryan, sue that woman into the ground. That became my mantra for the next few days. Sue that woman into the ground. I hired an attorney named Marcus Fitzgerald, who specialized in both HOA disputes and business litigation. He was a sharp guy in his early 40s who had actually sued our HOA once before over discriminatory parking rules. When I explained what Deborah had done, his eyes lit up like I had just handed him Christmas morning. This is the most clear-cut case of mail fraud and tortious interference I have seen in years, Marcus said, leaning back in his leather chair. Not only did she commit a federal crime, but she deliberately damaged your business relationships. We can go after her personally and the HOA. Can we get her removed as president? Absolutely. In fact, we can probably get the entire board dissolved and force a special election. But first, let's focus on the criminal aspect. Have you filed with the postal inspector yet? I had. The postal inspector's office had taken my complaint very seriously and assigned an investigator named William Chen. He had come to my house the previous afternoon and spent 2 hours going through everything, taking photos and collecting evidence. He had been particularly interested in the forged signature on the delivery confirmations. Mr. Peterson, what misses? Lancaster did is a federal offense under 18 U.S.C. 1708, Inspector Chen had told me. That's theft or receipt of stolen mail. It carries a maximum penalty of 5 years in prison and a $250,000 fine. I will be interviewing her later this week. Marcus loved hearing that. Perfect. Once the federal investigation is underway, we'll file a civil suit. We are going after her for actual damages, which include your lost contracts, the cost of restoring your insurance, any tax penalties, and lost business opportunities. Then we add punitive damages because her conduct was willful and malicious. We are talking potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars. I do not even care about the money, I said honestly. I just want her stopped before she ruins my business completely. You should care about the money, Marcus said seriously, because that's what will really hurt her and send a message to every petty HOA tyrant in Arizona that they cannot get away with this stuff. Over the next week, things moved fast. Inspector Chen interviewed Deborah, and apparently she had not gotten a lawyer before talking to him, which was a massive mistake. She had admitted everything, claiming she had the authority to regulate business mail as HOA president. Chen had immediately informed her that no such authority existed and that she had committed a federal crime. Meanwhile, word spread through the neighborhood about what Deborah had done. Most of my neighbors were horrified. Several of them came by to apologize for voting her in as president. A few admitted they had been afraid of her and her aggressive enforcement of every tiny rule. She fined me $200 because my garbage cans were visible from the street for more than 4 hours after pickup, my neighbor Tom Hensley told me. He was a retired firefighter who had lived in Saguaro Heights for 20 years. The rule says they should be put away promptly, but she decided that meant within 4 hours and started timing everyone. Another neighbor, Patricia Wu, had been threatened with daily fines because her desert landscaping included some rocks that Deborah claimed were not aesthetically consistent with community standards. The rocks had been there for 15 years. We need to get her out, Patricia said. She's turning our neighborhood into a police state. I suggested we call an emergency HOA meeting to discuss removing Deborah from the board. According to our bylaws, any homeowner could request a special meeting if they collected signatures from 20% of the community. We had 78 homes in Saguaro Heights, which meant we needed 16 signatures. Within 2 days, we had 43. Deborah tried to refuse to hold the meeting, claiming the petition was improperly formatted. But Marcus sent her a letter explaining that she had no legal basis to deny it, and that refusing would open her up to additional liability. The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday at 7 in the evening at the community clubhouse. In the meantime, my business was slowly getting back on track. I had managed to salvage most of my client relationships by explaining what happened and providing documentation. The tech startup agreed to extend their contract, though at a lower rate than originally negotiated. Janet's skincare company not only renewed but sent me a bonus payment for my trouble. My business insurance was reinstated, though I had to pay a reinstatement fee. The state tax issue was more complicated, but my accountant was working with the Department of Revenue to prove the delays were due to mail theft. The night of the emergency HOA meeting, the clubhouse was packed. Every seat was filled and people were standing along the walls. I had never seen this kind of turnout before. Usually, HOA meetings drew maybe a dozen people, mostly retirees with nothing better to do. Tonight, there had to be 70 people crammed into a space designed for 40. Deborah sat at the front table with the other 2 board members. Gary Sanders, a quiet accountant who mostly went along with whatever Deborah wanted, and Michelle Torres, a nurse who worked night shifts and rarely attended meetings. Both of them looked deeply uncomfortable. Marcus had advised me to let other people speak first and to save my story for maximum impact. So when Deborah called the meeting to order and asked for the purpose of the special session, Tom Hensley stood up. "We are here to discuss the immediate removal of Deborah Lancaster as HOA president and board member due to criminal conduct and abuse of authority." The room erupted in applause. Deborah banged her gavel, her face flushing red. "Order! You cannot just remove a board member without cause." "We have cause," Tom said. "Multiple causes, but I will let others speak to that." For the next hour, neighbors stood up one after another to detail Deborah's abuses, the excessive fines, the arbitrary rule interpretations, the aggressive enforcement that seemed to target people she personally disliked. One elderly couple talked about how she had threatened to put a lien on their house because their mailbox post was 3 inches too far to the left of their driveway. According to what manual? The husband, George Chen, had asked her. "We measured it ourselves. It is exactly where the HOA approved it 15 years ago when we moved in." "Standards change," Deborah had told him. "You need to move it or face daily fines of $100. They had moved it, spending $800 to hire a contractor, only to have Deborah then claim it was now too far to the right. Through all of this, Deborah sat at the front table, her expression growing harder and more defensive. When Michelle Torres tried to say something, Deborah cut her off with a sharp gesture. Finally, Tom nodded at me. I stood up, holding a folder full of documentation. "My name is Ryan Peterson, and I run a marketing consultancy from my home. 6 weeks ago, I started noticing that important business mail was not arriving. Contracts, invoices, tax documents, insurance renewals, all missing. When I investigated, I discovered that Deborah Lancaster had filed a fraudulent mail forwarding order with the post office, redirecting all my business correspondence to a P.O. box that she controlled." The room went silent. This was news to most people. For 38 days, she intercepted my mail, causing me to miss critical deadlines, lose contracts worth tens of thousands of dollars, and nearly lose my business entirely. When I confronted her, she claimed she had the authority to do this as HOA president because I was supposedly violating rules about home-based businesses. I held up the folder. "I have documented everything: the fraudulent forwarding order, the intercepted mail, the financial damages. And I am not the only victim. The United States Postal Inspector Service is currently conducting a criminal investigation into Deborah Lancaster for mail fraud, which is a federal felony carrying up to 5 years in prison." Now the room erupted in shocked conversation. Deborah stood up, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "That is a lie. I was enforcing legitimate HOA rules. No HOA has the authority to intercept federal mail," I said calmly. "What you did is a federal crime, and you are going to face the consequences." Marcus stood up from his seat near the back. "For the record, I am Marcus Fitzgerald, Mr. Peterson's attorney. We have filed a civil lawsuit against Mrs. Lancaster personally and against the HOA for her actions while serving as president. We are seeking compensatory and punitive damages in excess of $300,000. Deborah's face went from red to white. "The HOA will cover my legal fees. That is in the bylaws." "Actually, it is not," Michelle Torres said suddenly. Everyone turned to look at her. She pulled out a copy of the bylaws. "I looked this up after Ryan's situation came to light. The HOA only covers legal fees for board members acting in good faith within the scope of their authority. Criminal conduct is specifically excluded." Gary Sanders, who had been silent until now, cleared his throat. "I would like to make a motion to immediately suspend Deborah Lancaster from the board pending the outcome of the federal investigation." "I second that motion," Michelle said quickly. "You cannot do this," Deborah shouted. "I am the president. This is a coup." "All in favor?" Gary asked, ignoring her. "Aye," said Michelle. "Aye," said Gary. "Motion passes 2-0, Gary said. "Deborah, please leave the board table." For a moment I thought Deborah might actually refuse. She stood there, gripping the edge of the table, her knuckles white. Then she grabbed her bag and stormed out of the clubhouse, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. The rest of the meeting was spent discussing next steps. Gary agreed to serve as interim president until a special election could be held. Michelle proposed forming a committee to review all of Deborah's fines and enforcement actions from the past 6 weeks to determine which ones were legitimate and which should be reversed. That passed unanimously. Tom Hensley proposed that the HOA formally apologize to me and offer to cover my legal fees and documented business losses. That also passed unanimously, with Gary and Michelle looking relieved to have a way to make things right. As people filed out after the meeting, dozens of neighbors came up to shake my hand or pat me on the back. Patricia Wu hugged me, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for standing up to her," she said. "None of us had the courage." "You all stood up tonight," I pointed out. "Only because you went first." Over the next few weeks, the dominoes continued to fall. Inspector Chen completed his investigation and forwarded his findings to the U.S. Attorney's Office. They decided to prosecute Deborah for mail theft. Marcus advised me that this was actually somewhat unusual, as many mail fraud cases are settled with fines and probation. But the deliberate nature of Deborah's actions and the significant harm they caused made this a stronger case for prosecution. Deborah hired a criminal defense attorney, some guy named Richard Kowalski who specialized in white-collar crime. He immediately tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the U.S. Attorney's Office was not interested in anything less than a felony conviction. Marcus explained that this was partly because of my case's documentation, and partly because Deborah had been so uncooperative during the investigation. "She still thinks she did nothing wrong," Marcus told me during one of our meetings. "Her attitude has really hurt her chances of leniency." The civil case moved forward simultaneously. We had filed suit not just against Deborah personally, but also against the HOA, arguing that they were liable for her actions as president. Gary Sanders, now serving as interim president, actually contacted Marcus to discuss a settlement. The HOA wanted to avoid a trial and the associated legal costs. "They are offering to cover all your documented losses, plus $50,000 in punitive damages, if you will drop the HOA from the suit and pursue only Deborah personally," Marcus told me. I thought about it carefully. The HOA's offer would cover my actual damages and provide some compensation for the stress and hassle. Going after Deborah personally might be more satisfying emotionally, but Marcus had warned me that collecting a judgment from an individual could be difficult. "What do you recommend?" I asked. "Take the HOA's settlement," Marcus said. "It is a sure thing, and it is fair. We can still pursue Deborah separately if you want, but honestly, she is probably going to face criminal penalties that will hurt her more than anything we can do civilly." I agreed to the settlement. The HOA paid me $78,000, which covered my documented business losses, legal fees, and some punitive damages. They also formally apologized in writing and circulated a letter to all homeowners explaining what had happened and reaffirming that no HOA official would ever interfere with mail delivery again. The criminal case went to trial 4 months after the initial incident. Marcus helped me prepare my testimony, and I spent 2 days on the witness stand explaining everything that had happened. The prosecutor, an intense woman named Sarah Mendoza, was incredibly thorough. She walked me through every piece of evidence, every intercepted envelope, every missed deadline, every client I had nearly lost. Deborah's defense attorney tried to argue that she had genuinely believed she had the authority to redirect my mail as part of her HOA duties. He painted her as a dedicated community volunteer who had made an honest mistake about the scope of her authority. It might have been a compelling argument if not for one critical piece of evidence that Inspector Chen had uncovered. During his investigation, Chen had obtained the records for the P.O. box where my mail was being sent. Deborah had opened it 2 days before filing the mail forwarding order. That showed premeditation. She had planned this. Even worse, Chen had discovered emails between Deborah and another HOA president in Tucson, discussing strategies for dealing with homeowners running businesses from their houses. The other HOA president had suggested making things difficult for home-based businesses by controlling their lifelines. Deborah had responded that she was going to test a mail interception strategy. When those emails were introduced as evidence, I actually saw some jurors recoil. This was not an honest mistake. This was a deliberate scheme to harm my business. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before finding Deborah guilty of mail theft. She showed no emotion as the verdict was read, but her husband, a mild-mannered dentist named Philip who had sat through the entire trial looking miserable, put his head in his hands. Sentencing came 6 weeks later. The federal sentencing guidelines for mail theft suggested 18 to 24 months in prison. But Deborah's attorney argued for probation based on her lack of prior criminal history and her status as a respected community member. Marcus had submitted a victim impact statement on my behalf, detailing the ongoing effects of Deborah's actions on my business. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Harriet Schwartz, was not impressed by the defense's arguments. Mrs. Lancaster, you abused a position of trust within your community to deliberately harm a neighbor's livelihood, Judge Schwartz said. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment. This was a calculated campaign of harassment that lasted over a month. You showed no remorse when confronted and continued to justify your actions even after being informed they were illegal. I see no reason to believe you would not engage in similar conduct in the future, if given the opportunity. She sentenced Deborah to 14 months in federal prison, followed by 2 years of supervised release. She also ordered Deborah to pay restitution for my documented losses, though the amount was less than what the HOA had already paid me in the settlement. Still, the criminal restitution order would remain on Deborah's record permanently. Deborah was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs. Her husband followed, and I felt a brief pang of sympathy for him. He had seemed like a decent guy caught in his wife's mess. After the sentencing, Marcus and I went to a nearby restaurant to decompress. I ordered a burger and a beer, suddenly feeling exhausted. "How do you feel?" Marcus asked. Honestly, relieved and sad in a weird way. I never wanted to send someone to prison. I just wanted my mail back. She made her choices, Marcus said. Every step of the way she could have stopped. She could have returned your mail when you first confronted her. She could have cooperated with the postal inspector. She could have shown some remorse at trial. She chose not to do any of those things. He was right, of course. Deborah had brought this on herself through sheer stubbornness and an inflated sense of her own authority. Back in Saguaro Heights, life slowly returned to normal. The HOA held a special election, and Tom Hensley was elected as the new president. His platform was simple: enforce reasonable rules reasonably and treat neighbors like human beings. It was a low bar, but after Deborah's reign, it felt revolutionary. Tom's first act as president was to review all the fines Deborah had issued. He ended up reversing about 70% of them, determining they were either based on misinterpretations of the rules or applied inconsistently. George and his wife got their $800 back for moving their mailbox. Patricia's rock garden was formally declared acceptable. My business recovered fully. The tech startup not only renewed their contract but increased it, impressed by how I had handled the crisis. Janet referred me to 3 other companies in her network. Within 6 months, I was actually doing better than before Deborah's interference. I even got a few new clients specifically because of the publicity around the case. An article in the Phoenix Business Journal about the mail theft had painted me as a local businessman who had stood up to HOA overreach. Several small business owners reached out, saying they wanted to work with someone who had proven they could handle adversity. The whole experience taught me some valuable lessons. First, document everything. If I had not kept meticulous records of my expected deliveries and client communications, proving my case would have been much harder. Second, stand up to bullies, even when they have titles and claim authority they do not actually have. And third, communities are stronger than individuals. I could not have fought Deborah alone, but with my neighbors' support, we were able to end her tyranny and restore some sanity to our HOA. About 8 months after Deborah's sentencing, I ran into Philip, her husband, at the grocery store. We made awkward eye contact over the produce section. I considered pretending I had not seen him, but that felt cowardly. "Philip," I said, nodding. "Ryan." He looked tired and older than I remembered. "I owe you an apology. I should have stopped her." I knew what she was doing was wrong, but I convinced myself it was just HOA business and none of my concern. "I appreciate that," I said. "How are you doing?" Taking it day by day. "I filed for divorce. I should have done it years ago, but you know how it is. You think you can fix things, or that they will get better, and then suddenly your wife is in federal prison for committing mail fraud against the neighbor." Despite everything, I found myself feeling sorry for him. "That is rough. I am sorry you got caught up in all this." "I am sorry she did it to you," Philip said. "For what it is worth, she is getting help, therapy, anger management. I do not know if it will make a difference, but at least she is trying." We chatted for a few more minutes about nothing in particular before going our separate ways. I hoped Deborah was genuinely working on herself. Prison time was harsh, but maybe it would give her the perspective she desperately needed about boundaries and appropriate behavior. The following spring, Saguaro Heights held its annual community barbecue. It was the first one in years that people actually seemed excited to attend. Tom had made it clear that this was about community, not rules enforcement. There was no dress code, no requirement to pre-register, no assigned seating. Just neighbors hanging out, eating burgers and enjoying the beautiful Arizona weather. I brought my famous potato salad, which is really just my mom's recipe, but everyone seems to love it. As I set it down on the food table, Patricia came over with a bottle of wine. "For you," she said. "A thank you for saving our neighborhood." "I did not save anything," I protested. "We all did it together. You started it. That takes courage." Looking around at my neighbors laughing and relaxing, kids playing on the grass while parents chatted, I felt genuinely happy for the first time in months. This was what a community was supposed to be. Not a collection of rules and fines and petty enforcement, but actual people who cared about each other and looked out for one another. Tom clinked a glass and called for everyone's attention. "I just want to say thank you all for coming out today. This past year has been challenging for our community, but I think we have come out stronger on the other side. We have learned that HOAs exist to serve homeowners, not the other way around. And we have learned that it is okay to question authority, especially when that authority is being abused." Everyone applauded, and several people looked my way with appreciative smiles. "So here is to a new chapter for Saguaro Heights," Tom continued, raising his beer. "May we always treat each other with respect, enforce rules fairly, and remember that we are neighbors first and HOA members second." "Hear, hear!" someone shouted, and we all raised our glasses. As the sun set over the desert, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, I sat in a lawn chair next to George and his wife, sharing stories about the old days before Deborah had taken over. They told me about how the neighborhood used to have block parties every month, how people would help each other with yard work and home repairs, how it had felt like a real community. "I think we can get back to that," George said thoughtfully. "Tom has the right attitude. And I think we all learned our lesson about paying attention to who we elect to the board." "Definitely," I agreed. "I will never skip another HOA election, that is for sure." The conversation drifted to other topics, normal everyday things like the best landscapers in the area, and whether the new taco place on Camelback Road was any good. It felt wonderfully boring and normal. As I drove home that night, my mailbox caught my eye at the end of my driveway. It was just a mailbox, plain and ordinary, but for a moment I felt a surge of gratitude for it, for the simple, reliable delivery of mail, for federal laws that protected that delivery, for postal inspectors and judges and juries who took those laws seriously. I pulled into my garage and sat there for a moment, reflecting on everything that had happened. The fear when I realized my mail was missing, the anger at discovering Deborah's betrayal, the stress of the investigation and trial, the relief of victory, and finally, the peace of resolution. My phone buzzed with an email from a potential new client, a restaurant chain looking to expand their digital presence. I smiled and made a mental note to respond in the morning. Business was good. My neighborhood was healing. Justice had been served. Sometimes the system actually works, I thought. Sometimes standing up to bullies pays off. Sometimes doing the right thing, even when it is hard and scary, leads to good outcomes. I went inside, fed my cat Oliver, and made myself dinner. Just a regular Tuesday night in Phoenix, Arizona. No drama, no HOA president stealing my mail, no federal investigations. Just normal, boring, beautiful everyday life. And honestly, after everything I had been through, normal felt pretty amazing. The next morning, I checked my mailbox and found 3 client invoices, a magazine subscription, and a postcard from my sister who was vacationing in Colorado. Everything exactly where it was supposed to be. I stood there holding those pieces of mail, smiling like an idiot, grateful for something most people take completely for granted. My phone rang. It was Marcus. "Hey Ryan, just wanted to give you a heads up. Deborah's criminal restitution payment hit your account this morning. The judge ordered monthly payments for the amount she owes beyond what the HOA already covered." "I honestly forgot about that," I said. Well, she did not. Her attorney called me yesterday asking if we would accept a lump sum payment at a discount to close out the obligation. Apparently she has access to some family money and wants to be done with this. What do you think? I think it is up to you. If she offers enough to make it worth your while, there is no reason not to accept. It means you get your money now instead of waiting 2 years for monthly payments. We discussed numbers, and I agreed that if Deborah offered 75% of the total obligation as a lump sum, I would accept. Marcus called me back 2 hours later to say she had agreed. Another $10,000 would hit my account within the week. "This is really over now," Marcus said. "How does it feel?" "Surreal," I admitted. "A year ago, I never could have imagined any of this happening. HOA drama was about parking spaces and lawn height, not federal prison and six-figure settlements. Welcome to America, where even the smallest amount of power can corrupt people. You just happened to catch one of the worst cases I have seen." After we hung up, I decided to do something productive with part of the settlement money. I made a donation to a nonprofit legal aid organization that helped homeowners fight HOA abuse. If my nightmare could help other people avoid or escape similar situations, then at least something good would come from it. I also invested in a new security camera system for my house, including a camera focused directly on my mailbox. It seemed paranoid, but after what I had been through, I wanted documentation of every piece of mail delivered, just in case. Work kept me busy for the rest of the spring and into summer. I landed a major contract with a healthcare company that needed a complete digital marketing overhaul. It was the biggest deal of my career, and I threw myself into it with enthusiasm. My home office, which had almost become a casualty of Deborah's interference, was thriving. In June, Tom called me about an opportunity. A local news station wanted to do a story about HOA reform and had contacted him asking if anyone from our community would be willing to participate. Specifically, they wanted to interview me. "You do not have to do it," Tom said quickly. "I know this has been a lot, and if you just want to move on, everyone would understand." I thought about it for a day before agreeing. If talking about my experience could help other people recognize HOA abuse and feel empowered to fight back, it was worth reliving some uncomfortable memories. The interview aired on a Thursday evening. The reporter, a sharp woman named Lisa Morneau, had done her homework. She interviewed me, Tom, Patricia, and even Marcus. She had obtained court documents and email evidence. The segment was 14 minutes long and pulled no punches about what Deborah had done. The response was overwhelming. My phone blew up with messages from friends I had not talked to in years, from neighbors, from complete strangers who found my contact information online. Most were supportive, sharing their own HOA horror stories. A few were critical, arguing that I should have just followed the rules and moved my business to a commercial space. One message stood out, though. It was from a woman in Tucson named Carol Brennan, who said she was the other HOA president Deborah had been emailing. She apologized profusely, saying she had been horrified when postal inspectors showed up at her door with questions about those emails. "I thought we were just venting," Carol wrote. "I never imagined she would actually do something like that. I want you to know that I cooperated fully with the investigation, and I have resigned from my HOA board. What happened to you made me realize I had been part of the problem, turning HOA service into a power trip instead of community service. I am truly sorry." I appreciated her message and told her so. It took courage to reach out and apologize, especially when she could have just stayed silent and hoped I never connected the dots. The news segment had an unexpected benefit. 2 weeks after it aired, I received a call from a literary agent in New York who had seen the story. She asked if I would be interested in writing a book about my experience and the broader problem of HOA overreach in America. "There is a real appetite for this kind of story right now," she explained. "Millions of Americans live in HOAs, and most of them have at least one horror story. Your case is extreme enough to be compelling, but relatable enough that readers will see themselves in your struggle. The idea intrigued me. I had always enjoyed writing, and the thought of turning my nightmare into something that could help others was appealing. Plus, the advance she mentioned would be nice financial cushion. I spent the next 6 months working on the book in my spare time, which was not much because my consulting business was busier than ever. But I carved out early mornings and weekends to write, interviewing other HOA abuse victims, and researching the history and legal structure of homeowners associations in America. The book was published the following spring under the title Return to Sender: One Man's Fight Against HOA Tyranny. It got decent reviews and sold well enough that the publisher asked about a follow-up focusing on practical advice for homeowners dealing with difficult HOAs. During this time, I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Deborah had been released from prison after serving 11 months of her 14-month sentence. She had earned early release for good behavior and completing various rehabilitation programs. According to Patricia, who had heard from someone who had heard from Philip, Deborah had moved to New Mexico to live with her sister. She would not be returning to Phoenix. I felt a strange mixture of emotions hearing that news. Relief that she was gone and would not be causing any more problems in Saguaro Heights. Satisfaction that justice had been served. But also a tiny bit of sympathy for someone whose need for control had destroyed her life. She made her choices, Marcus reminded me when I mentioned these mixed feelings to him. Every single step of the way, she chose the worst possible option. She chose to intercept your mail instead of working with you to find a legitimate solution. She chose to lie about her authority. She chose not to return your mail when confronted. She chose not to cooperate with investigators. She chose not to show remorse at trial. Those were all her decisions. He was right, of course. Deborah's downfall was entirely self-inflicted. But I still hoped she had learned something from the experience and would not hurt anyone else in the future. Life in Saguaro Heights continued to improve. Tom served his full term as president and was re-elected twice more. Under his leadership, the HOA became what it should have been all along: an administrative body that maintained common areas, organized community events, and enforced reasonable rules with discretion and common sense. The excessive fines stopped. The petty enforcement stopped. The climate of fear that Deborah had created evaporated. People started caring about their neighborhood again because they wanted to, not because they were afraid of being punished. My business continued to thrive. I hired my first employee, a recent college graduate named Sarah who was brilliant at social media strategy. Then I hired another, and another. Within 3 years of the mail theft incident, I had a team of 6 people and had outgrown my home office. I finally did rent commercial space, not because an HOA forced me to, but because it made sense for my growing business. On the 5-year anniversary of the day I discovered my mail was being stolen, I decided to host a dinner party for the neighbors who had supported me through everything. Tom and his wife Julie, Patricia, George and his wife Helen, Marcus and his partner David, and a few others. We gathered in my backyard on a perfect spring evening, the desert air cool and comfortable. Over wine and good food, we reminisced about the whole crazy saga. Enough time had passed that we could laugh about some of it, though the underlying anger at Deborah's actions remained. "I will never forget your face at that emergency meeting when you dropped the bomb about the federal investigation," Tom said, grinning. "I thought Deborah might actually spontaneously combust. I thought she might attack him," Patricia added. "She was so furious." "She was furious because she got caught," Marcus said. "People like Deborah think rules only apply to other people." When consequences finally catch up to them, they are genuinely shocked. To consequences, I said, raising my glass. To consequences, everyone echoed. As the evening wound down and guests started heading home, Tom pulled me aside. "I want you to know something," he said seriously. "What you did, standing up to Deborah, it changed this community. Not just because you got rid of her, but because you showed everyone that it is okay to question authority. That we do not have to accept abuse just because someone has a title. You gave people permission to stand up for themselves." "I just wanted my mail back," I said, echoing what I had told Marcus years ago. "I know. But you got so much more than that. You got justice. You protected your business. You helped your neighbors. And you reminded all of us what community is supposed to be about." After everyone left, I sat in my backyard for a while, looking at the stars. Oliver came outside and jumped into my lap, purring contentedly. I scratched behind his ears and thought about everything that had happened. 5 years ago, I had been terrified. My business was circling the drain, my mail was being stolen, and a petty tyrant with a title seemed unstoppable. The path from that low point to where I was now had been difficult and stressful, but ultimately worth it. I had learned that standing up for yourself matters, even when it is scary. I had learned that communities are stronger than individuals. I had learned that the legal system, for all its flaws, can actually work when people are willing to engage with it. And I had learned that sometimes the worst experiences in life lead to the best outcomes. My phone buzzed with an email from a homeowner in Florida who had read my book and was dealing with a similar HOA nightmare. She wanted advice on how to fight back. I made a note to respond in the morning with detailed suggestions and the names of some good attorneys in her area. This had become an unexpected part of my life, helping other people navigate HOA disputes. I had become something of an accidental expert on the topic, and while it was not how I had planned to spend my time, it felt meaningful. The mail theft that Deborah Lancaster had orchestrated had been intended to destroy me. Instead, it had led me to discover strengths I did not know I had, to build a stronger business, to write a book, and to help countless other people facing similar abuse. She had tried to damage my operations deliberately, and in a twisted way, she had succeeded in changing my life. Just not in the way she intended. I looked at my mailbox, visible in the light from my front porch. Such a simple thing, really. A metal box where letters and packages arrive. But also a symbol of something bigger, the basic infrastructure of communication and commerce that we all rely on. When someone interferes with that, they are not just inconveniencing you. They are attacking your ability to function in society. Deborah had learned that lesson the hard way. I hoped other would-be HOA tyrants would learn from her example without having to experience federal prison themselves. As I headed inside for the night, I checked my security camera app one last time. The view of my mailbox was clear. Empty now, waiting for tomorrow's deliveries. Whatever arrived, I knew it would be there, untouched and unmolested, exactly as it should be. Sometimes the simplest things are the most important. Sometimes justice prevails. Sometimes standing up to bullies works out. And sometimes, just sometimes, the system actually protects the people it is supposed to protect. I slept well that night, the deep sleep of someone with a clear conscience and no regrets. My business was thriving. My community was healthy. My mail was safe. And Deborah Lancaster was someone else's problem now, far away in New Mexico, hopefully learning to mind her own business. In the end, that was all any of us really wanted. To be left alone to live our lives, to run our businesses, to be part of a community without fear of petty tyrants abusing whatever small amount of power they managed to acquire. It was not too much to ask. And thanks to federal mail theft laws, a good attorney, supportive neighbors, and my own refusal to be intimidated, it was exactly what I had achieved. The story of how I found the HOA redirecting my business mail to damage my operations deliberately had a happy ending after all. Not because everything was easy, but because when push came to shove, I pushed back harder. And that made all the difference.